The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Amelia Faulkner's cracked lips as she crawled through the vast Arizona desert, the red dust coating her once fine dress, her will to live diminishing with every labored breath. Her so-called fiancé had driven her out here at gunpoint, stolen her money, her horse, and left her to die after discovering she'd witnessed his gang's bank robbery in Tucson, a death sentence delivered with a cruel smile and empty canteen. The year was 1878, and the Southwestern Territories showed no mercy to those unprepared for their harsh realities. Amelia had come west with dreams of teaching and independence, not to die face down in the sand at 22. Her throat burned as if lined with fire, her skin blistering under the relentless heat. 3 days now she'd been stumbling through this hellscape, following what she hoped was north, each step becoming smaller than the last. When her legs finally gave out, Amelia collapsed onto the scorching earth, her vision blurring as black spots danced across her field of view. This was it. She closed her eyes against the blinding sun, thinking of her family back in Boston who would never know what became of her. The distant sound of hoofbeats registered in her fading consciousness, but she dismissed it as hallucination, a cruel trick of a dying mind. The sudden shadow falling across her face seemed equally unreal. Yet when rough, calloused hands gently turned her over, the sensation was undeniably tangible. "Miss, can you hear me?" The voice was deep, urgent. "Sweet Jesus, what happened to you?" Through swollen eyelids, Amelia caught sight of a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The man quickly uncorked a canteen and carefully lifted her head. "Small sips now," he instructed firmly. "Too much at once will make you sick." The water touched her parched lips, and Amelia nearly sobbed as the cool liquid trickled into her mouth. She clutched weakly at his wrist, desperate for more. "Easy," he said, his voice gentler now. "There's plenty more. I promise I won't take it away." As her senses slowly returned, Amelia began to make out more details of her rescuer. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and a star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. "Name's Thomas O'Rourke," he said, helping her take another careful sip. "Deputy Marshal out of Willowcreek. What's a woman like you doing out here alone?" Amelia tried to answer, but her voice emerged as a painful rasp. He shook his head and carefully lifted her onto his horse. "Save your strength. Explanations can wait." He mounted behind her, one strong arm holding her securely against his chest. "Nearest town's half a day's ride. Think you can hold on that long?" She managed a weak nod before darkness claimed her again. When Amelia next opened her eyes, she was in a small room with whitewashed walls, lying on a narrow bed beneath a quilt. The window showed the purple hues of dusk, and a lamp cast a warm glow from a nearby table. Her throat still hurt, but the maddening thirst had subsided. Her skin felt cool and damp. Someone had bathed her face and arms. A door creaked open, and a stout woman with graying hair entered, carrying a tray. "Oh good, you're awake," she said, setting the tray on a bedside table. "I'm Martha Wilson. The doctor says you'll live, though it was a close call." "Deputy O'Rourke found you just in time." "Where am I?" Amelia managed, her voice thin but audible. "Willowcreek. Small town, but we've got a decent doctor and a safe place for you to recover." Martha helped her sit up and handed her a cup of broth. "The deputy's been asking after you regularly." Seemed mighty concerned. Amelia sipped the broth, letting its warmth soothe her throat. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. You were pretty delirious with fever when he brought you in." Martha's kind eyes studied her. "Whatever happened out there, you're safe now." Over the next few days, Amelia's strength slowly returned. Dr. Peterson visited daily, pronouncing her recovery remarkable given the severe dehydration and exposure she'd suffered. Martha, who Amelia learned was the owner of the town's only boarding house, supplied a simple dress and kept curious townsfolk at bay. On the 4th morning, as Amelia sat in a chair by the window watching the town come to life, a knock came at her door. Deputy Thomas O'Rourke stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat less trail-worn than when she'd first seen him. "Miss," he greeted her with a nod. "Good to see you upright." "Deputy O'Rourke," Amelia replied. "I believe I owe you my life." He shifted uncomfortably as if unused to acknowledgement. Just doing what anyone would. Think you might be up to telling me what happened. Official business, you understand. Amelia gestured to the chair across from hers. Of course. For the next hour, she related the whole terrible tale how she'd come west from Boston to take a teaching position in Tucson. Met Richard Hollister, who'd courted her with charm and promises, only to discover his true nature when she accidentally witnessed him and his gang robbing the Territorial Bank. She explained how he'd forced her at gunpoint into his wagon the next day, driven her far into the desert, and left her there with nothing but the clothes on her back. Said no one would ever find my body, she concluded, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. And they nearly didn't. Thomas's face had grown increasingly grim as she spoke. Hollister, he repeated. About 6 feet tall, blonde hair, scar through his right eyebrow. Amelia looked up sharply. Yes, you know him. Been after his gang for months. They've hit banks and stage coaches across 3 territories. He leaned forward. Miss Faulkner, your testimony could help put them away for good. If you can catch them, she said. A small, determined smile crossed his face. That's exactly what I aim to do. In the days that followed, Amelia regained her strength while Thomas rode out to telegraph his superiors and alert neighboring jurisdictions about Hollister. The townsfolk of Willowcreek, once they heard a sanitized version of her story, rallied around her with offers of assistance. The local schoolteacher, an elderly woman named Mrs. Abernathy, even suggested Amelia might assist at the schoolhouse once she was fully recovered. Children need to learn, Amelia told Thomas one evening as they sat on Martha's front porch. That's what brought me west in the first place. Noble calling, he replied, whittling idly at a piece of wood. More important than most of what passes for ambition out here. She studied him in the fading light. At 30, Thomas O'Rourke had the weathered look of a man who'd lived hard years. Yet there was something gentle in how his strong hands crafted the small wooden figure taking shape beneath his knife. What about you, Deputy? What brought you to this life? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. My father was a lawman, he finally said. Taught me that a badge means standing between good folks and those who do them harm. His knife paused. He died doing just that when I was 16. Seemed only right to follow his path. I'm sorry about your father, Amelia said softly. Thomas nodded. Long time ago now. He held up the small wooden horse he'd carved. For you, figured you might want a better memory of horses than your last experience. Amelia accepted the carving, touched by the unexpected gesture. Their fingers brushed briefly and a curious warmth spread through her chest. It's beautiful. Thank you. 2 weeks after her rescue, Amelia began helping at the schoolhouse. Mrs. Abernathy was grateful for the assistance with her 23 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years old. The work gave Amelia purpose and helped quiet the nightmares that still sometimes woke her in the night, memories of thirst and abandonment, of Richard's cruel face as he drove away. She rarely saw Thomas during this time. Word had come that Hollister's gang had been spotted near the New Mexico border, and he'd ridden out with a posse. In his absence, Amelia found herself watching the street from the schoolhouse window, an inexplicable tension in her chest easing only when she caught glimpses of his tall figure riding back into town after each search. You've got your eye on our deputy, Mrs. Abernathy observed one afternoon as they cleaned the classroom blackboards. I don't know what you mean, Amelia replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Child, I've been teaching children longer than you've been alive. I recognize a person looking for someone they care about. The older woman smiled kindly. He's a good man, one of the few. He saved my life, Amelia said simply. I'm naturally grateful. Of course, Mrs. Abernathy agreed, though her knowing smile remained. That evening, as Amelia helped Martha prepare supper at the boarding house, a commotion erupted in the street outside. Riders were coming in fast, and townsfolk rushed to see what was happening. Amelia wiped her hands and stepped onto the porch just as Thomas dismounted from his horse, his face grim beneath trail dust. We got 2 of Hollister's men, he announced to the gathering crowd. They're locked up in the jail. Hollister and the others split off toward Colorado territory. His eyes found Amelia in the crowd, and he made his way toward her. "You're all right," she asked quietly when he reached the porch steps. "Just tired," he assured her, "but there's something you should know. One of the men we captured says Hollister's been asking about you in towns all through the territory." A cold fear gripped Amelia's heart. "He knows I survived," Thomas nodded grimly, "and he's none too happy about it. I've posted extra guards at the jail, but I need you to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone, especially after dark. You think he'd come here, to a town with a marshal's office? Men like Hollister, they don't think straight when their pride's wounded, and you wounded his plenty by surviving." Thomas hesitated. "I'd feel better if you stayed at Martha's and kept to town until we bring him in." Amelia straightened her shoulders. "I won't live in fear, Deputy. I can't." A flash of admiration crossed his face. "Then at least let me teach you how to shoot, just in case." The next morning, Thomas took Amelia to a clearing behind the livery stable. He carried a small revolver that he explained had belonged to his sister before she married and moved east. "It's lighter than mine," he said, showing her how to hold it. "Better for your hands." Amelia had never touched a firearm before coming west. In Boston, such things had been considered unsuitable for ladies of her background. Now, with Hollister's threat hanging over her, the weight of the gun in her hand felt less like impropriety and more like necessity. Thomas proved a patient teacher. He stood close behind her, guiding her arms into position, his breath warm against her ear as he explained about sighting and pressure. The closeness sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Breathe out as you squeeze," he instructed. "Nice and steady." Amelia fired, the report loud in the morning air. The tin can they'd set up 30 feet away didn't move. "Again," Thomas encouraged. "Nobody hits anything their first try." By the end of the hour, Amelia had hit the target twice and felt a strange sense of accomplishment. As they walked back toward town, Thomas handed her the revolver. "Keep it with you," he said. "I've got rounds for it too." "I pray I never need to use it," she replied, carefully tucking it into her pocket. "So do I," he agreed, "but the world doesn't always answer our prayers the way we'd like." June faded into July, and the summer heat intensified. No further sign of Hollister emerged, though Thomas maintained a vigilant watch. Amelia settled into life in Willowcreek, her position at the school becoming more permanent as Mrs. Abernathy's arthritis worsened. The townsfolk no longer viewed her as an outsider to be pitied, but as one of their own. What surprised Amelia most was how content she felt in this dusty frontier town, so different from the refined Boston society she'd left behind. Here, people's worth was measured by their character and contributions, not their family name or social connections. Even more surprising was her growing awareness of Thomas O'Rourke. They found reasons to speak almost daily discussions about town safety that turned into conversations about books they'd read, childhood memories, and dreams for the future. Sometimes he would walk her from the schoolhouse to Martha's boarding house, his steady presence beside her becoming something she looked forward to more than she cared to admit. "You're sweet on him," Martha observed one evening as Amelia sat on her bed, brushing her hair. "And unless I'm much mistaken, the feeling's mutual." "He's just being protective," Amelia protested weakly. "It's his job," Martha snorted. "His job is to protect the whole town, not carve wooden animals for every citizen or find excuses to walk past the schoolhouse 3 times a day." Amelia's hands stilled on her hairbrush. "Does he really? Lord save me from young people in denial," Martha sighed. "Yes, child, that man circles you like the moon circles the earth and with about as much chance of breaking away." Before Amelia could formulate a response, shouts erupted from the street. Martha hurried to the window. "Fire," she exclaimed. The livery stables ablaze, they rushed downstairs and out into the street where townsfolk were already forming a bucket brigade from the well to the burning structure. Flames licked up the wooden walls, and horses whinnied in terror inside. Thomas was at the front, directing men as they broke down the doors to free the animals. Amelia joined the line of women passing buckets, the heat from the fire scorching her face even from a distance. For 2 hours they fought the blaze, finally containing it before it could spread to neighboring buildings. By then, the stable was a smoldering ruin, though thankfully all the horses had been saved. As the town caught its breath, Thomas approached the stable owner who stood staring at the remains of his livelihood. "This wasn't no accident, Tom," the man said, his voice carrying to where Amelia stood. "Somebody poured coal oil all around the back wall. I could smell it." Thomas's gaze swept the crowd, then locked with Amelia's. The grim set of his jaw sent a chill through her despite the lingering heat from the fire. Later that night, after the town had quieted, Thomas knocked on Martha's door. His face was still smudged with soot, his eyes serious as he asked to speak with Amelia privately. Martha led them to her small parlor, then discreetly withdrew. "The fire was deliberate," Thomas said without preamble, "and I found this nailed to a post behind the stable." He held out a piece of paper. Written in crude letters was a simple message: "She's next." Amelia's blood ran cold. "Hollister," Thomas nodded. "He's here, or at least his men are. I've got the whole town on alert," but he hesitated, then continued firmly, "I think you should leave Willowcreek." "Leave?" The suggestion struck her like a physical blow. "But this is my home now. My students won't have a teacher at all if you're dead," Thomas cut in, his voice harsh before softening. "Amelia, please, I can arrange an escort to take you to Denver. You'd be safer in a bigger city with a full police force." She stood and paced the small room. "So I run again, first from Boston when my father died and left nothing but debts, then from Tucson when I discovered Richard's true nature, now from here from—" She stopped, unable to say the words forming in her heart. Thomas rose and caught her hands in his. "I can't bear the thought of harm coming to you." The raw emotion in his voice stilled her protests. She looked up into his storm-gray eyes and saw something there that mirrored the confusing feelings she'd been harboring. "Give me 2 days," he said. "I'll have everything arranged for safe passage." Reluctantly, Amelia agreed. For the next day, Thomas doubled the watch around town, while Amelia tried to prepare her students for her absence. She told them she needed to visit a sick relative, a lie that tasted bitter on her tongue. That night, she packed her few belongings, including the wooden horse Thomas had carved for her. The following morning dawned with an eerie stillness. Thomas had arranged for Amelia to leave at noon with a freight wagon heading north, accompanied by 2 trusted men. As she walked toward the schoolhouse for one final morning with her students, the revolver Thomas had given her tucked in her pocket, Amelia felt eyes watching her from somewhere in the quiet town. She had just reached the schoolhouse steps when a man stepped out from behind the building. Amelia froze, her blood turning to ice as she recognized Richard Hollister's handsome, cruel face. "Hello, Amelia," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Surprised to see me, Richard." She took a step backward, her hand slipping into her pocket to grasp the revolver. "You've caused me considerable trouble," he said conversationally, moving toward her with the casual confidence of a predator. "Surviving, talking to the law, very inconvenient." "Stay back," Amelia warned, drawing the gun. Richard laughed. "Look at you playing at being brave, you won't shoot me." "You don't have it in you." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing for her arm. Amelia fired. The bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing his shirt and drawing a thin line of blood. Richard's face contorted with rage as he knocked the gun from her hand and seized her by the throat. "I should have made sure you were dead the first time," he snarled, his fingers tightening. Amelia clawed at his hands, desperate for air, black spots forming at the edges of her vision. The sound of running footsteps barely registered. "Let her go, Hollister," Thomas's voice rang out. "Or the next shot goes through your head." Richard spun around, using Amelia as a shield, a knife suddenly at her throat. 20 feet away stood Thomas, his revolver aimed steadily, his expression coldly furious. "Deputy O'Rourke," Richard said, "I wondered when you'd show up." "Drop the gun, or I open her throat right here." "Then you'll be dead a second later," Thomas replied evenly. "No matter how this plays out, you're not walking away." Amelia could feel Richard's breath coming faster, the knife pressing harder against her skin. Her eyes locked with Thomas's, seeing the fear beneath his professional calm. "You care for her," Richard observed with malicious delight. "How touching. I'm going to enjoy watching your face when I kill her." As he shifted his grip to make good on his threat, Amelia remembered Thomas's shooting lessons. In one desperate move, she stomped hard on Richard's instep, then threw her weight forward and down. The knife sliced a shallow cut along her collarbone as she broke free, but Richard's momentary surprise was all Thomas needed. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. Richard staggered backward, looking almost surprised as crimson bloomed across his chest. He crumpled to the ground, the knife falling from his lifeless fingers. Thomas was at Amelia's side instantly, pulling her away from Richard's body, his hands gentle as they examined the cut on her neck. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. Amelia shook her head, trembling with the aftermath of fear and violence. Without warning, Thomas pulled her against his chest, holding her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat racing to match her own. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. People were running toward them now. Martha, the town doctor, curious townsfolk drawn by the gunshots. Amelia barely noticed them, aware only of Thomas's arms around her and the realization thundering through her heart. She loved this man. "I'm not going to Denver," she said against his chest. Thomas drew back slightly to look at her face. "What? This is my home," she said simply. "You're here." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like hope. Before he could respond, they were surrounded by concerned citizens, and the moment was lost in the chaos of explanations and exclamations. Later that evening, after the doctor had treated the shallow cut on Amelia's neck and Richard's body had been taken to the undertaker, Thomas came to Martha's boarding house. The older woman tactfully disappeared upstairs, leaving them alone in the parlor. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Thomas had cleaned up, changing out of his blood-stained shirt, his badge gleaming on his vest. Amelia had changed too, wearing a high-necked dress that covered the bandage at her throat. "His men?" she asked finally. Captured at the edge of town, they gave up quick once they heard their boss was dead. Thomas took a step closer. "They'll stand trial for the bank robberies, attempted murder, arson. They won't threaten anyone for a very long time." "Good," Amelia said softly. Another silence fell between them, charged with unspoken words. "Did you mean what you said?" Thomas asked finally. "About staying because I'm here," Amelia gathered her courage. "I did." "I know it's forward of me, and perhaps you don't feel I love you," he interrupted, the words rushing out as if he couldn't contain them any longer. "Have almost since I found you in that desert. Every day since then has just made it clearer." Joy bloomed in Amelia's chest, bright and unexpected. "I love you too." Thomas closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. When his lips met hers, Amelia felt as though all the pieces of her broken life had suddenly, miraculously aligned. The kiss deepened, and Amelia's hands slid up to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not today or tomorrow, but when you're ready." "I don't want to spend another day wondering if you might leave." Amelia smiled, feeling tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. Yes, I'll marry you." As summer turned to fall, Willowcreek celebrated the wedding of Deputy Thomas O'Rourke and the schoolteacher Miss Amelia Faulkner. The whole town turned out for the occasion, the small church overflowing with well-wishers. Martha wept openly from the front pew, while Mrs. Abernathy beamed with satisfaction at a romance she'd predicted months earlier. Thomas had built them a small house at the edge of town, close enough for both their duties, but with a view of the open country beyond. On their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of their new home, Thomas wrapped his arm around Amelia's waist and pointed to the western horizon. "Hard to believe something so beautiful can be so dangerous," he said, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "The same desert that nearly killed me brought me to you," Amelia replied, leaning against his solid warmth. "Perhaps that's true of most dangerous things. They carry both destruction and possibility." Thomas turned her in his arms. "You've become quite the philosopher, Mrs. O'Rourke." "I've had good cause to contemplate life's strange paths," she said, her hands resting on his chest. "A year ago, I never would have imagined standing here with you feeling so completely." "Home," he suggested. Yes, she agreed, smiling up at him. Exactly that. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that matched her own. As he swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, not in Boston's society drawing rooms or Tuckson's schoolhouse, but here in this frontier town with this man who had given her water when she was dying and hope when she had none. The seasons turned, and life in Willowcreek settled into a rhythm for the O'Rourkes. Thomas continued his work as deputy, gradually earning a reputation throughout the territory for fairness and determination. Amelia took over the school completely when Mrs. Abernathy finally retired, expanding the curriculum to include advanced mathematics and literature for the older students. Their home became a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Thomas built a larger porch where folks would congregate on summer evenings, sharing news and stories while watching the sunset over the distant mountains. Amelia planted flowers that had no business surviving in desert soil, yet somehow thrived under her careful tending. In the spring of 1880, Amelia discovered she was expecting their first child. When she told Thomas, his face transformed with such wonder and joy that she laughed through happy tears. "A baby," he whispered, laying a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" She asked, though his expression had already answered. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, gathering her close. Terrified, exhilarated, grateful beyond words those might come closer, the pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and fall. By winter, Amelia had reluctantly turned her teaching duties over to a young woman from Denver whom she'd been training. The townsfolk watched over their schoolteacher with protective affection, bringing offerings of advice, baby clothes, and special foods. On a cold January morning in 1881, after 18 hours of labor with Martha and the town doctor in attendance, Amelia gave birth to a healthy daughter. Thomas, who had worn a path in the floorboards with his pacing, was finally allowed into the bedroom. The sight of his wife, exhausted but radiant, holding their tiny daughter, brought him to his knees beside the bed. "She's perfect," he breathed, one finger gently touching the baby's petal soft cheek. "Just like her mother." "We'll call her Sarah after your mother," Amelia asked softly. They had discussed names but made no final decision. Thomas nodded, too overcome to speak. Sarah's tiny hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, and he felt his heart expand with a love he hadn't known was possible. That night, after Amelia and the baby had finally drifted to sleep, Thomas stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the star-filled desert sky. He thought about the twisted path that had led him here, all the choices, good and bad, that had brought him to this moment. Finding Amelia dying in the desert had changed everything, though he hadn't realized it at the time. "Thomas," Amelia's sleepy voice came from the bed. "Is everything all right?" He turned back to her with a smile. "Everything is perfect. I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "Come to bed," she said, shifting the sleeping baby to make room for him. "It's too cold to be stargazing." As he settled beside her, wrapping an arm around both his wife and daughter, Thomas felt a contentment so complete it bordered on disbelief. For a man who had spent most of his life chasing danger, this quiet happiness seemed almost too good to be true. "I love you," he whispered into Amelia's hair. "Both of you, more than I have words to say." "Then it's a good thing," she murmured drowsily, "that some things don't need saying to be perfectly understood." Sarah grew into a strong, curious child with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit. By her third birthday, she was the darling of Willowcreek, trailing after Thomas on his rounds through town and sitting attentively at the back of Amelia's classroom, practicing being a student though she was still too young for formal schooling. In the summer of 1884, Amelia gave birth to their second child, a son they named James. Where Sarah was bold and adventurous, James was thoughtful and observant, watching the world with serious eyes that missed nothing. Life wasn't always easy. The frontier presented constant challenges: drought years when crops failed, winter storms that isolated the town for weeks, occasional outbreaks of illness that kept Amelia awake with worry for her students and children. Thomas faced dangers too, from outlaws passing through to disputes between ranchers that sometimes turned violent. Yet through it all, they faced life together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Their home remained a haven, filled with books and music, laughter and learning. On the 10th anniversary of the day Thomas had found Amelia in the desert, they rode out together, leaving the children with Martha for the day. They followed the trail east out of town, into the harsh beauty of the landscape that had nearly claimed Amelia's life. "Are you sure you want to come out here?" Thomas asked as they dismounted near a rock formation. "It doesn't hold good memories." Amelia took his hand, gazing across the vast expanse of red earth and distant mountains. "That's exactly why I wanted to come, to replace the memory of fear with something better." From her saddlebag, she withdrew a small sapling wrapped in damp cloth, a cottonwood tree barely 2 feet tall. "We're going to plant this," Thomas asked, eyebrows raised. "Right here," she confirmed. "Where death almost won but didn't, where hope began instead." Together they dug a hole in the hard ground, working side by side as they had for a decade now. Thomas fetched water from their canteens, far more plentiful than on that desperate day years ago, and Amelia carefully settled the young tree into its new home. "It might not survive," Thomas pointed out practically. "Desert's a hard place for anything to grow." Amelia smiled up at him, her face lined now with a decade of sun and laughter, but still alight with the spirit that had first captured his heart. "Some things thrive where you least expect them," she said, dusting off her hands and standing. "I think this tree will surprise you." Thomas pulled her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she still fit against him after all these years. "You've been surprising me since the day we met, Amelia O'Rourke." As they rode back toward town, toward their children and the life they'd built together, Amelia felt a deep sense of completion. The desert stretched around them, beautiful and dangerous, much like life itself. She had faced its worst and survived, found love in its harshest reaches, and built something lasting where once she had almost perished. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold, the same sun that had once nearly killed her now warming her back as they headed home. Thomas rode beside her, steady and true as he had been since the day he offered his canteen to a dying stranger. Sometimes, Amelia reflected, the greatest journeys began with the simplest acts of kindness: a drink of water, a hand extended in the wilderness. Everything that mattered in her life had followed from that moment. Her teaching, her children, her place in this community, and most of all, the love that had transformed her from a desperate woman abandoned in the desert to someone who belonged, deeply and completely. As they crested the hill that overlooked Willowcreek, Thomas reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "Ready to go home?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he smiled at her. Amelia squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength and gentleness combined. "I'm already there," she replied, and urged her horse forward, toward the lights beginning to twinkle in the valley below. Years passed, and the small tree they had planted in the desert grew, defying expectations with its tenacious grip on life. Thomas would ride out occasionally to check on it, bringing water during the driest months, watching with quiet amazement as it sent roots deep into the seemingly barren earth. Sarah grew into a fiercely independent young woman who, to no one's surprise, decided to become a teacher like her mother. After attending a women's college in Denver, she returned to Willowcreek to teach alongside Amelia, bringing fresh ideas and boundless energy to the schoolhouse. James, quieter but no less determined, showed an aptitude for medicine. With Thomas and Amelia's encouragement, he apprenticed with the town doctor before heading east to medical school. His letters home were filled with descriptions of city life and new medical practices, but always ended with how much he missed the open skies of his childhood. When Thomas's hair began to silver at the temples, the town council approached him about becoming the full marshal of Willowcreek. The position would mean less riding the territory and more administration safer work as he entered his 50s. "What do you think?" he asked Amelia as they sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "I've been a deputy so long, I'm not sure I know how to be anything else." Amelia took his hand, noting how the years had added new scars and thickened the calluses, yet the fundamental strength remained unchanged. "You've been many things," she said softly. "Deputy, husband, father, pillar of this community, Marshal seems a natural next step." He smiled, the crow's feet around his eyes deepening. "As long as I don't have to wear one of those fancy suits the federal marshals sport." "I rather think that would suit you," she teased. "Very distinguished." Thomas accepted the position, and Willowcreek celebrated their long-serving deputy's promotion with a town gathering that lasted well into the night. As marshal, Thomas helped guide the town through the changing times as the frontier gradually disappeared, replaced by expanding settlements and the arrival of the railroad 20 miles to the north. In 1898, at 68 years old, Thomas finally retired from law enforcement. By then, Willowcreek had grown into a proper town with boardwalks instead of dusty paths, a new 2-story schoolhouse where Amelia and Sarah both taught, and even electric lights in some of the main buildings. That same year, James returned from the East with a medical degree and a wife, a kind-eyed nurse named Eleanor who quickly won the hearts of his family and the town. They built a house near Thomas and Amelia's, and James took over the medical practice from the aging town doctor. Sarah, to everyone's amusement, fell in love with and married a deputy from the next county over a serious young man who looked at her with the same admiration Thomas had always shown Amelia. "The apple doesn't fall far," Thomas observed wryly at their wedding. On cool evenings, Thomas and Amelia would still sit on their porch, watching the life of the town unfold before them, so different from the raw frontier settlement of their early years together, yet still carrying the spirit of community that had sustained them. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Amelia asked one evening as they watched their grandchildren playing in the yard, James's twin boys and Sarah's daughter, all under the age of 6. Thomas was silent for a long moment. "Not really," he finally answered. "Some things seem inevitable looking back, like the path was already there waiting for us to find it." Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder, her silver-streaked auburn hair catching the last light of day. "I like that thought. That we were always meant to find each other, even in the vastness of the desert." In the summer of 1908, 30 years after Thomas had found Amelia dying in the desert, they made one last pilgrimage to the cottonwood tree they had planted on their 10th anniversary. The journey was slower now. Thomas, at 78, and Amelia, at 72, no longer rode with the easy grace of their younger years. Their son James insisted on accompanying them, concerned about the heat and the distance. The tree stood tall and strong, its roots having somehow tapped into an underground water source that allowed it to thrive where no tree should. Its leaves shimmered in the light breeze, providing the only shade for miles around. "Would you look at that?" Thomas marveled, standing beneath its spreading branches. "Prettiest sight in the whole territory." Amelia slipped her hand into his, feeling the familiar contours that had held her through 3 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. "It found a way to live despite everything." "Like someone else I know," Thomas said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. James watched his parents with quiet understanding, seeing not the aging couple others might perceive, but the enduring love that had shaped his entire life. He'd heard the story of their meeting countless times, how his father had found his mother abandoned and dying, how that single act of mercy had blossomed into a love that built a family and helped shape a town. As they prepared to leave, Amelia placed her hand on the tree's rough bark. "We won't likely make this ride again," she said softly, "but I'm glad to see it one last time. The grandchildren will come see it," James assured her. "I'll make sure they know the story." The ride home was taken at an easy pace, with frequent stops to rest in the shade. As they approached Willowcreek, Thomas reached across and took Amelia's hand, just as he had done countless times over the years. "Worth it," he said simply. "Every moment." Amelia understood all he wasn't saying, the acknowledgement of a life fully lived, challenges faced together, a love that had only deepened with time. "Every single one," she agreed. 5 years later, Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep. Amelia curled against his side as she had been for 35 years. The town of Willowcreek mourned its longtime lawman and founding father, the man whose steady hand and fair judgment had helped shape a community from a frontier outpost. Amelia lived another 2 years, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and generations of former students. She continued to visit the schoolhouse regularly, her presence a living connection to the town's early days. When asked about the secret to her remarkable life, she would smile and say simply, "Water when you're thirsty, hope when you're lost, and love always, these are the only things that truly matter." On a golden autumn afternoon in 1915, Amelia joined Thomas in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Willowcreek. The entire town attended her funeral, from the oldest residents, who remembered her arrival, to children who knew her only as the gentle elder who told the best stories about the old days. Sarah, James, and their families planted wildflowers on the graves, knowing how their mother had always coaxed beauty from the harsh desert soil. As the townsfolk dispersed, James lingered, looking out over the town his parents had helped build, feeling their legacy in every street and building. "They found each other in the unlikeliest place," Sarah said, coming to stand beside her brother. "Do you think they knew then what they were starting?" James shook his head. "I think they were just two people doing their best in a difficult world. The rest followed naturally." Far out in the desert, the cottonwood tree continued to grow, its roots reaching deep for water, its branches offering shelter to travelers and wildlife. Local people began to call it the miracle tree or O'Rourke's folly, not knowing the full story of why it had been planted there. But the descendants knew. They passed down the story through generations, how a woman left to die in the desert was saved by a man with water and kindness, how that simple act of humanity blossomed into a love that helped tame a frontier, and how sometimes the most barren places can yield the most abundant life. Long after Willowcreek grew into a proper city, long after automobiles replaced horses and paved roads covered the old trails, the story endured. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would make pilgrimages to the cottonwood tree, now massive and distinctive on the desert landscape, to remember their beginnings. And travelers passing through, seeking shelter from the merciless sun beneath its spreading branches, would sometimes swear they could sense something special about the place, a feeling of hope, of possibility, of love that had somehow seeped into the very soil and air around the improbable tree standing tall and green in the vast red desert.